Hello, everyone. This is an Arcola Bible Church podcast, and I'm your host, Mark Kalpskoff. The second verse of that once well-known hymn reads, "Run the straight race through God's good grace. Lift up thine eyes and seek his face. Life with its way before us lies. Christ is the path, and Christ the prize." That hymn written by John Samuel Bewley Monsell in the 1800s. Three names, John Samuel Bewley. I like that. Well, how do you see your life? Is it something you're always looking into the future for? Something that will begin as soon as you are out of high school, at college, or married? Or is it perhaps something more retrospective, something that has passed you by, just something you look back on? Today we're going to hear from someone who we used to hear from every Sunday at Arcola Bible Church. But first, Jane Caulfield has the verse for the day.
Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight.
Thank you, Jane. Our guest today needs no introduction to most of us. I'm talking to Ray Cardwell, one of the founding pastors of Arcola Bible Church, currently teaching at a Christian school in Fredericksburg. This is part one of 4 short conversations with Ray, talking about how we view our life's course. And today we join him partway through the first conversation. You have mentioned to me that how we view life is important, and one of the ways of viewing life is to view it as a course, like a marathon run or something like that. Tell us about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, Mark, I would say one of my life verses is Ephesians 2:10, which of course is right after Ephesians 2:8 and 9 that we're all familiar with, for by grace we've been saved. Verse 10 says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." And there's a couple things in that verse that just really strike me. First of all, we are his workmanship. We are his masterpiece. God has made you and me exactly the way he wants us to be for this. Notice, good works which he prepared beforehand. So before we were even born, God laid out this path, this course, if you will, of good works that we are uniquely created to fulfill. And that excites me. You talk about, that generic statement, God has a plan for your life. I would submit this verse really locks that in. And that, so then the question is, okay, what is the course? And how do I find it? How do I walk it? Just again, another verse that I think supports this view of life is Paul, in writing in 2 Peter chapter 4, verse 7, near the end of his life, he makes the statement, "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith." So I think there's strong biblical support for this idea of viewing life as a course, as a path that God has laid out before us. And this last year of transition for Mary and I has caused me to just kind of rethink through that, and there's just, I think, several life lessons for us in that. If we view life as a course, another component I add to it would be, as our life goes through different phases, I refer to them as laps. There's different laps or different phases of this course. And, so often when we view life or when we view our careers, we think in terms of one career. Two of my faith heroes, one of them in particular has been Moses. If you think about his life, for 40 years, he was in Pharaoh's court. He had the best education the world had to offer. If you think of the architectural structures that they built, so the engineering training that he might have received, the mathematical training, the political training as far as in Pharaoh's court, he had all of the best that the world had to offer for training, and he was there for 40 years. Then, of course, we have that incident where he, gets thrown out, and now for the next 40 years, he's in the desert taking care of sheep. And from a human perspective, you think, wow, what a life wasted. And yet, after 80 years, God essentially says, okay, Moses, now you're ready. You have finally completed the training that you need to fulfill the path that I have created you to fulfill. And that, of course, was his leadership of the nation Israel out of Egypt. All of that training in Egypt and all of that training in the wilderness all went into God's preparation for Moses to complete that task. And that is just always served as an example for me, especially as an old guy, seeing life as this, where each phase, God is preparing me and training me for what lies ahead. Caleb was another great example. In Numbers chapter 14, when they had conquered the land, Caleb was the one that said, hey, Moses promised me this land, and he was 85 years old at the time. So again, as an old guy, that encouraged me to say, hey, if we're still breathing, God still has a portion of this path laid out before us. So if we look at this view of life, maybe an application question for all of us to think about today is, okay, wherever you are, whatever phase of this course you're in, whatever lap you're in, what is God teaching me today in this phase of my course? What is God teaching me? What am I to be learning? How is he preparing me, and potentially for the next phase? And that's what's fascinating, is because we really don't know where our life is headed.
Sometimes some of those experiences can be really kind of tricky, or worse, they seem very futile. You're stuck in some dead-end job. You're stuck, you want to be married and you're single and lonely. And many of these things seem can be very difficult as you try and figure out, I don't know what on earth God's trying to teach me. I know Jill sometimes says to me, well, I don't know what God's trying to teach me, but I hope I hurry up and learn it so I can move on, So.
Yeah, I mean, clearly Moses, those 40 years in the wilderness is a great example. Joseph, remember his brothers sold him to Egypt, and he's spending time in jail. It's not until the end of Genesis where we say, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. There's so many instances. Paul's another great example. He's in a Roman prison he's writing to the Philippians, and he's saying, hey, I'm having the opportunity to share the gospel with the Praetorian Guard. That's the elite troops that are interacting with the upper echelons of the Roman government. And yet it was Roman prison that gave him the ability to do that. So yeah, absolutely, Mark. Our current circumstances, from a human perspective, can be awful, and it might be many years later when we're able to look back and go, "Whoa, I see what God was doing there."
Right.
I think another maybe just application for today is, not only is what God teaching me, but having that, and you alluded to it, having that long-term view of life, just resting, being assured that God has got a plan. I might not be able to see where it's going, but there is one, and He's working the details. So if we maintain that long-term view of life and trust Him as we move forward each day.
Yeah, even on there was something that occurred to me as you started off about the good works He's prepared in advance for us to do. And in a sort of a micro level, there's so many times where I've been going along the street and I've seen someone by the side of the road or something a similar situation that's been very transient, and I've said, oh, usually after I've zoomed one by and said, I should have pulled over there. That was the good work that God prepared for me to do, and I failed on that. There's been sometimes where I've turned around and come back, but there's been times where it's been very difficult, or I've gone on too far and then felt bad for the rest of the day.
Yeah, that's a heavy one, Mark. I think we've all experienced that, where we had it in our plan as to what we were going to do that day, and God brings. That's the neighbor, right? When Jesus talked about the Good Samaritan, it was that man that was beaten and robbed was brought into his path, and he changed his plans because he saw that as the new plan for the day.
Yeah. Okay. I love that perspective because it really helps when you're struggling along through a little drier pastures, or if you're getting old and wondering if life is passing you by, or and that can happen at sort of any age, depending on your circumstances. Well, that's all we have time for this episode. And now we have to get on with the good works God has prepared for us to do today. If you enjoyed listening, download the Podbean app or go to arcolabible.podbean.com and click follow to automatically be notified of each new episode. Ray will be back after our next episode, where we will hear from Dave and Mary Green from the trails of North Carolina.